Snap strategists. Today, we're flipping the script. Literally. We're diving deep into the world of Mr. Negative, where turning things upside down isn't a mistake, it's the master plan. Get ready to see your high-cost, low-power cards go from zeros to heroes in a snap. Let's break down how to harness that negative energy and turn your opponent's smiles upside down. Mr. Negative is a 4-cost, -1 power card that swaps the power and cost of all cards remaining in your deck when it reveals. At first glance, this doesn't seem like a very good idea, but we can use and abuse this to get super cheap or even free cards if we put the right ones in the deck. The lower the power and the higher the cost is the best for this strategy, but we also need to be able to make sure we can pull off the win if we don't end up drawing into Mr. Negative early. The deck as a whole has Psylocke, Ravonna Renslayer, Mystique, Sage, Magic, Mr. Negative, Wong, Iron Man, Sarah, Black Panther, Arnim Zola, and Taskmaster. And if you take a look at the power and the cost of each card, you'll see that no card has a power that is greater than its cost. And in the case of 5 of them, there's 0 power altogether. But it's also true to say that none of these cards are weak, even if they don't have a power to show of their own. The idea behind these particular cards is that even if we don't see Mr. Negative in a reasonable time, we'll still be able to produce the power that we need to pummel our opponents into the ground. And this does just that, and surprisingly well, too. The whole idea behind Mr. Negative is to make your cards cheaper or free. He's a cost reducer at his core, and we have a couple of backup plans in place to allow us to keep our gears turning even if this inverted villain doesn't make an early appearance for us, which is pretty important because the average energy cost of the cards we're using is pretty high. The reduction package is Psylocke, Ravonna Renslayer, Mr. Negative himself, and Sarah. Ravonna is easily the most powerful of these cards in this deck given its nature, and when played on curve, we can get Mr. Negative out a turn early. She has an ongoing ability that allows you to play your cards with 1 or less power for 1 less energy, and half of this deck fits that bill, so she's useful through every turn after the one she's played. This isn't the only card that'll get him out a turn early, though. We can also make use of Psylocke for this. Her ability gives you an extra energy to use the following turn. A turn 2 Psylocke turns into a turn 3, either Mr. Negative or Wong, and either are incredible engine pieces to be able to get on the field a turn early. The other use for Psylocke would be to play it on turn 3 to be able to get Sarah out on turn 4. Sarah makes all your cards cost 1 less, and when paired with the other cards in this list, will be fully set up for an explosive final turn that will definitely leave your opponents frustrated. Each of those cards, alongside Magic, should all be played by turn 5. And now that we're on turn 6 with only a handful of power on a couple of lanes and no visible plan in place, it's time to do our turn 7 setup. With most of your cards only costing 1 or 2 energy at this point, you should be able to play Wong and Mystique on a lane by themselves. Wong allows your on-reveal abilities to trigger twice, and Mystique will copy his ongoing ability as long as it's the last card you've played. Stacking those on top of each other will make it so your on-reveal abilities trigger 4 times that location instead. If you haven't seen Wong by this point, though, then you can use Iron Man as a backup plan, and Mystique on another lane. And if you haven't seen Mystique yet, then you want to do Wong on one lane and Iron Man on another. Especially if you've been able to Mr. Negative earlier, because that'll make Iron Man free, and he himself will have 5 power to supply to the doubling of that lane. Also, depending on the energy and reductions you've been able to get at this point, you may have to put down one of your big boy cards a turn early. It's not ideal because you're more susceptible to disruption, but you'll still pull off the win if your opponent doesn't have Shang-Chi. But Priest, you are saying, none of our cards have any power, remember? So why would we need to be nervous of Shang-Chi? Well, that's a great question. It's because of your heavy hitter cards that are Black Panther and Sage. Black Panther has an on-reveal ability that doubles his power, which seems pretty nifty when you can do it 4 times. Sage also has a really awesome one that'll make her super big too. On reveal, she gets +2 power for each different power among the other cards at that location. When you do that 4 times, she can reach close to 50 power if the other cards fill her requirements. And the best part about all this is that she was most likely free to cast, or at least only 1 energy to do it. And then you still have all that energy to play around with for the rest of the turn. This will allow you to get a setup piece out earlier that you may have missed. It'll make it so your next turn is just that much easier. Sage is easily the golden child of this deck and really makes it pop. An ideal game would actually not have you play Wong until turn 7 because your setup was so complete that you can Wong, Mystique, Sage, and still have energy to play around with to finish things off. And to make that happen, we need a way to convert our big power on that lane to another location. The last and final play you do for the game will either be Arnim Zola or Taskmaster. Zola has an on-reveal ability that destroys one of your other cards at that location to make copies at the other locations. And yes, this is also affected by Wong's doubling trigger. So if you have Wong and Black Panther or Sage on a lane, then you put your Zola there and watch as both of your cards are destroyed and copies are made at the other two locations and their abilities trigger again since they were technically just revealed there. And if you're lucky enough, Arnie will make a copy of Wong at each location first so that the other card gets the doubling trigger again, making them cakes as big as Texas. This is a pretty known strategy with Wong and Panther though, so people are generally ready for it and hit you with an armor so that you can't destroy the cards to begin with. Well, we have an answer for that too. Just make sure that the Sage or Panther is the last card you've played, and then you can play Taskmaster to copy their power onto a different location. Maybe even with a free Iron Man if you're lucky enough. Either way though, this strategy is explosive on the final turn and produces power seemingly out of nowhere, and a whole lot of it. As much as I've been praising this deck though, it doesn't come without its drawbacks just like any other deck. However, I don't think it's so much a weakness with the deck itself, but more of a weakness with Wong specifically. Since we rely on Wong so heavily to help produce the power that we need, I think it's only fair to bring up how easy this card is to disrupt. There's a multitude of very easy cards to get your hands on that can and will turn you off, and there isn't really much you can do about it, unfortunately. I built this deck with that in mind since I'm tired of trying to play cool Wong combo decks, and a simple Cosmo will force you to retreat, losing game after game and cube after cube. My thought was to make something that doesn't telegraph to your opponent that you're playing Wong, and this will do that sometimes, but not every time. Your best bet is to try to play around disruption, meaning that like a turn 4 Wong should not always be followed up by a turn 5 Panther. Maybe you Sarah on a different lane instead, or Iron Man on a different lane if your cost reductions will allow you to still go big the following turn. Just be smart and cautious when it comes to playing Wong, and you should still find your way on top, at least most of the time. There's one more card that I feel like I need to mention, which might raise some eyebrows as to why it's not in the deck. Jane Foster Thor is a card that allows you to draw all cards that cost 0 from your deck. On the surface, this seems like an auto-include, but I left it out for a reason. It was in the deck initially, and I played its first 100 or so games with it, but I came to realize that its usefulness was heavily outweighed by its drawbacks. First off, Mr. Negative makes this a 6-cost card, and while playing this on turn 6 in preparation for an explosive turn 7 sounds like an awesome idea, in reality, you've already drawn all but 3 cards from your deck by turn 6, and a lot of times this would only get like 1 card in my hand, or in a lot of cases, just none. I came to the realization it's just not worth the slot to be able to run it. When it worked, it was really cool. But that was so far and few between that I decided to cut it, and the deck seemed to gain a little bit more consistency once I did. And then secondly, it's only there to support an early Mr. Negative play. It has no other uses in the deck. And adding a card into a deck that only supports one other card in the deck, and only if that card is played early enough, seems like a complete waste of a slot in my opinion. I would not suggest cutting something for it. To give this deck and other decks of mine a gauge to measure each other up against, I put them on a 5-star rating system that has 5 categories. Those categories are power, setup, win rate, cube gain rate, and accessibility. In power, which measures how big of creatures the deck can produce, I'm going to give this a very healthy 4 stars. Both Sage and Black Panther get overwhelmingly big on a scale that we don't see in many other decks. It's not uncommon for most decks to finish their games with no more than 25 to 30 power on their highest lanes. This thing gets into the hundreds. I have decks that can produce more power though, so this doesn't quite tip the 5-star mark. For setup, I'm going to have to rate this an unfortunate 2 out of 5. There's a whole lot we're trying to make happen with this deck, and it doesn't quite hit the mark every game. There's a lot of moving pieces, and it can be hard sometimes to find your way out of sticky situations, but it does happen, and it's so satisfying when you do. In win rate, this deck has earned itself a solid 3-star rating. This is mostly due to the setup being finicky and Wong being easily counterable, but it definitely holds its own. At the time of this recording, I have played 200 games with it, and it's sporting a nice 45% win rate according to my Snap fan metrics. Honestly though, that was from the conception of the deck, and I was still experimenting a lot and moving things in and out and losing a ton of games early on. I really feel like this deck would be at least 50% or slightly above if I decided to restart the tracker once I was satisfied with all the cards that I was going to keep in the deck. Regardless though, I wouldn't rate it higher than a 3, even if it was at 50%, because of how finicky the setup can be, which does result in more losses than I'd care for. However, where it may be lacking in win rate, the cube gain rate is through the roof and is at a stunning 5-star rating. This deck has earned me more cubes this season than any of my other decks that I've ran in previous seasons. What makes it such a powerhouse is the fact that you don't telegraph your strategy at all. It's really difficult for your opponents to know what to prepare for, and most get super confident when you seemingly have done nothing substantial for the past 4 turns. It's now turn 5 with no obvious turn 7, so they snap. What they don't know is that you have 3 free spells and 2 others that only cost 1 energy, and you're about to draw your last card of the deck, and you know it's Wong, and you're about to poop all over this mofo, and they have no idea what's coming. And finally, I'm going to give this a 3 in accessibility. Most of these cards are Series 3 and are rather easy to get your hands on. The exception to that is Sage, which is a Series 5. If you don't have that card, you can try switching it out for Ironheart, but you would lose your secondary win con if that were the case. Games are still winnable, but you would rely more on Iron Man copies using Mystique or Zola rather than Sage and Panther. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video and the deck. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and you can find me live on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Depriesticles. Have a great day, everyone, and happy snapping.